I've already been introduced, so people should know who I am. And I was asked to do a talk on developing a ringing cluster because I'm a local organiser for the Loddon Ringing Hub, which is an art teaching centre, centre teaching group. So where are we? Well, we're in the Oxford Diocesan Guild, which, as you can see, is huge. That has all the advantages of size, which are considerable. But we're just a little group circled down at the bottom right, and we're a little group of towers that are really quite close together. So just introduce to you who we are. There's 5 towers: Sonning, which are 2000 weight 8, Walton St Lawrence, which are 1200 weight 6, Wargrave, which are 1700 weight 8 but go far worse than Sonning do, Hurst, which 1400 weight ground floor 8, and Twyford, which are probably our easiest bells, which are 1200 8. Now, those of you who are observant will notice that when Leslie put this together, she said we were 6 towers. Well, that was just before the pandemic started. We were 6 towers. There's our 6th tower, which is St John's at Shottersbrook. And I think one of the important things that illustrates is we need to be flexible. It's not we are these 5 towers and we will never be anything else. If it works to add another one, that's great. If it works to lose 1 or 2, then that's great too. It just needs to be what's working for us at the time. And what we've done has changed over time. But let's have a look where we are now. 23rd of April, 2021, a date well known to me because that's when I got my 2nd jab. So that made me very happy. But we also made a lot of youngsters happy. Most of our hub youngsters haven't actually enjoyed virtual ringing. They're all keen to get back in the tower, but virtual ringing hasn't really done a huge amount for them. So on 23rd of April, the Twyford young ringers have their first practice. Not brilliant ringing, but they haven't run for a long time. Now, again, for the observant of you, you'll have noticed that that's not Twyford. That's actually Hurst. One of the big advantages of having the hub is that we were able to decamp the youngsters to Hurst. And you may have noticed that they've got big doors at the bottom which can open outside. It's also got a screen open to the church. So absolutely ideal for ventilation. Not ideal for little people ringing bells that are bigger than they're used to, with a much longer draft than they're used to. So actually they were doing quite well, and hopefully they will continue doing that. So what actually got us started, because if some of you are thinking that this might be a good idea, why did we actually start? Well, I don't think we would have done, except somebody asked us to consider it. So as 3 people in this area, one at Sonning, one at Walton St Lawrence and one at Wargrave, had actually been on the Module 1 and Module 2 courses and were full members of ART, some observant person must have noticed that and asked us, the 3 of us, whether we would consider it. So it made sense to us because we already had some cooperation between the towers. So at one point, Hurst and Twyford had a joint practice. At one time, Sonning and Wargrave had a joint practice. Joint practices not ideal because people sometimes forgot which tower they were at that particular week, and it didn't necessarily work, but you know, we'd made a start. We used to help each other with some of our handling teaching as well. So we were already doing some things. One thing I think also helped is the 5 and now 6 towers are fairly close together, and perhaps a little bit further than some of the other towers in the branch. We've got some other towers that are very close, but there happens to be a sopping great river in the way, which doesn't help. But mostly we just thought it was a good idea when we sort of thought about it and saying, well, we kind of do this anyway. It will just help us formalize it and make it move forward. So that's why we actually got started in the first place. So what did we actually do to get starting? Well, we didn't actually do a huge amount. The three of us talked about it, thought about the pros and cons after we'd been asked, and generally, yes, we thought it'd be a good idea. So we exchanged some emails between ourselves, talked to the tower captains, because at that time, none of us who were art members were actually tower captains at the towers at which we rang. So the tower captains also thought it was a good idea. They agreed with us, and so they made a donation to art, and we formally became an art teaching hub in July 2016. That's when we actually started off. So what did we actually do? Well, first thing we did is we had some dedicated workshops, not practices as such. These were more sort of specific workshops. We did have a meeting. That was, I think, in May 2017 in the pub. So we call it a formal meeting, but we did have a meeting and we discussed quite a bit what we were actually going to do. You know, how could we move this hub forward and develop what we were doing so that we weren't just a bit of paper that said we're a teaching hub, but actually to do something and improve the ringing in our area, get more people involved, making sure all the learners had a good learning experience. And we certainly started to attend each other's practices more, which was good because most of the towers have got 1, 2, maybe 3 more advanced ringers. And that's not an awful lot of good unless you're in ringing room with Wheatley. There's no problem. But we've just never had enough in each practice to really move things forward. By going to each other's practices and helping each other out, all the practices raised their standard. There was more involved, which was really quite nice to have. So that was our very first steps. The meeting, we sort of thought about the next steps. Where are we going to go from here? What can we do? So first thing to think about is time for you to do some work. We were talking about, we were attending each other's practices more, but I'd be interested to see what you think might discourage ringers from going to other towers, because this could be one of the barriers of producing a successful cluster. So let's see what you think. Hopefully David's got a poll for you. Yes, excellent.
That's not the one we wanted to.
That's the one we want.
That was the one. Okay.
Yeah. So give you time to think about that and see what might be.
We have about 50% of the people voted so far. They're all rushing in now. 60. Still coming in. I'll give it another few seconds. We've got 80% of people have voted. Up to 83, still coming in. Last few seconds, I'll close the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share the results.
So the one that's come up there that is seen as perhaps the most common reason is not knowing anyone. And again, I think that's where having a formal cluster can help, because ringers, the more experienced ringers maybe from each tower, are visiting the other towers as a regular basis. I've also been involved in the teaching. So if you're a very inexperienced ringer, you're just handling, then you're used to these people, you've seen these people, you know these people, and therefore it's not as daunting maybe to go somewhere else, because you think, oh, well, so-and-so's there. And you may have actually been asked, sort of, okay, what are you doing on such and such a night? Why don't you come along to us, see what it's about? And again, I think that will help in terms of making silly mistakes or losing control, that type of thing. If you know there's somebody there who's actually helped teach you to ring a bell, then again, it might not be so daunting. I think this is where a small group of towers working together can be very effective. If you've got a much bigger group, then you're not going to know all the other ringers in those other towers as well as you do in the small groups. I think that's somewhere where it's really helping. Now, going down sort of about 30% is worrying about letting other people down, about holding other ringers back. That's something I find some of the less experienced ringers do worry about quite a bit. Quite a few of the learners I've spoken to really sort of, oh, well, yeah, but you've got to ring that for me, and we're stopping you ringing this, that, and the other. So again, I think that's where being a small cluster can help, because everybody feels part of the same unit, not that I'm going to such and such a person's tower and causing difficulties, holding them back, you know, may not want. We're all part of the same group, so it really doesn't matter which tower you go to. Lack of time, I thought that might have come up higher. And that's something that might change post-pandemic. More people perhaps working from home, so you haven't got so much of an issue that you're not getting home till 7 o'clock in the evening, you haven't seen the kids all the time, you've been at home, it only takes 2 minutes to walk down the stairs. So that might help. And getting there and it being too difficult. Now, that is quite a consideration, because I think some of the old boundaries that established districts and deaneries, associations and so on may not be the most helpful in modern terms. So it might be even a cluster going between one association and another. There might be a little group of towers where it works, they're close together, rather than necessarily saying, oh, well, I'm in such and such a guild and I'm in such and such a guild, and we never really talk to each other. So I think that's interesting what you've got there, and perhaps seeing some of the ways in which a cluster can help overcome some of those problems and encourage people to visit other towers, which would be nice. Okay, moving on with the, do I just get rid of that there? Yes, very good. So the next steps that we established after we'd had our meeting in the pub, as we do, we arranged a Module 1 course. We felt that was quite important, because 2 of the towers didn't have teachers who'd actually been involved in a Module 1 course. And I know from a personal point of view, I've been teaching people to ring for years and years and years. The reason I went on a Module 1 course is I saw my colleague from Sonning saw the materials that he'd got, and as a teacher I went, wow, that's good, I want a piece of that. And the only way I could do it was to go on a course. So I did that and actually found I learned quite a lot, and I've changed some of my teaching as a result. So we had a Module 1 course locally, we had it at Twyford, and quite a number of ringers from the hub went on that course, plus a couple of people from elsewhere. So we arranged a Module 1 course, that was good outcome. And as I say, our teachers, particularly at Hurst and Sonning, not Hurst and Twyford, were really got a lot out of that. Then we arranged quick courses and workshops weekly. We would try and do one or the other every week. So what I'll do is I'll go through the next steps and then we'll look at some of them in a bit more detail. We arranged some focused practices. We produced some certificates, and we did even more working together for teaching handling. So I'll go backwards through those and have a look in a bit more detail of what we did and why we think it's helped the cluster to be successful. So one of the most useful things we've done is to teach handling together. One of the big challenges we had, Hurst when we started didn't have an active band. There were 2 ringers, I think there were 3. So that had sort of fallen out of practice on Sunday service ringing. But there was a big drive with Ringing Remembers, and initially I think it was 5 enthusiastic recruits, but that was in September, so we had 2 months to get them to be able to ring for November the 11th. Now, if you've got a situation where you've got 1 teacher in the tower and 5 learners, possibly only 4 at one particular practice, that's going to be a real challenge. If you change that to 3 teachers with maybe 4 at the practice, then that becomes very efficient, because as we all know from the work that ART have done, intensive teaching works. So this way they got much more intensive teaching. So each student could be having hands-on with 1 teacher. If there was a 4th or 5th student there, they could be observing, they could be doing hand ring exercise, hand transfer exercise, also door jam exercise, all sorts of things that they could be doing, switching in and out. So there they are, it worked, it was successful, and on November the 11th, they rang rounds on their own. They did really well. So obviously not all of those are the Ringing Remembers recruits, but a lot of them were. So that's one advantage that we had. Another advantage that we found is that we're teaching students not necessarily specifically at one tower. They can move between towers, they can move between teachers. And because we're an art ringing cluster and we're all using the Learning the Ropes scheme, that really helps because we're talking the same language. The student knows where they are, we know where the students are, and they're getting the same kind of information and the same kind of approach from whichever teacher they've got. So here I've got, she's Wargrave, she's actually a Wargrave learner. Very early stages of putting it all together, as you will see, but it shows some of the advantages of working together. So here we are, this is at Wargrave, and we were having some serious problems at Wargrave. Mainly losing tension. There's various other problems as well. So, with not much else teaching-wise in between, same learner, now at Twyford.
Because it's very obvious the tension at hand stroke, but make sure you feel into hand stroke as well, that's it.
So nearly moving to a different tower, things have just improved enormously. And as you can hear, there's more than one person being taught. They've got teachers from more than one tower, learners from more than one tower. So again, they feel included. They feel there's other people doing the same as they are, which is quite nice. Whoops, my mistake. So, just to summarise, oh no, stop.
Because it's very obvious the team as well, that's it.
I didn't mean that. Don't get this technology business. Okay, so some of the other things that we found that has helped by doing this. For instance, you might find a particular student, it's easier for them to do it during the day, during weekdays, or it's easier for them doing it at evenings, or they can do one and their teacher can only do the other. So for instance, there was somebody learning at Twyford and he was between jobs. So he was available during the day, but wanted to be with his young family in the evenings. So he came to Wargrave and did some learning at Wargrave because we were available to teach him during the day. We've had students where it's a split family. 1 week they'll be with mum, 1 week they'll be with dad. Again, can't always get to the practice that's their practice, so they can come along to one of the other practices and feel that this is their place, not that they're imposing themselves on somebody else. The social thing, that was good. We had some weekday practices for a while. On a morning, we had them at Wargrave, and people used to come along for the social. We used to go to the pub for coffee after we'd finished, and we did it while it worked. So for a while that was working. I had people from about 3 or 4 towers coming along to that. And then they'd moved on. They weren't handling anymore. Well, they were handling, but they weren't at that stage of learning anymore. And so we haven't done that for a while. So we do need to be flexible. We do need to keep changing what we're doing. The more than one pair of eyes, I think, is fairly obvious. It can be really tricky to be observing and close in teaching at the same time. The other thing we found helped, sometimes as a teacher, you can feel you're working very hard, very alone. This way, we've got other people to help. So you can sort of say, oh, could you run my practice tonight? Can you come along? Can you help? Which is quite good. So that's the teaching, the handling, that's the help. The certificates, until I started preparing this, and one of my fellow teachers from one of the other towers reminded me I'd forgotten that we'd started doing these. So I need to restart them because I think it really helped. So we know that with the Learning the Ropes scheme, get to your level 1, you get a certificate and so on, which is really good and really motivating. But they're quite big steps. You've got to do quite a lot to get to one of those stages. So we started producing certificates which we could give for all sorts of things, like you've run rounds. Now that's a big thing for a student, to actually run rounds on their own while their teacher's sitting over the other side of the room. There's a lot of first quarters. We used to produce a lot of certificates for that. There's one for first inside. Beyond that, these people are using Bellboard and looking up and getting their own rewards. But certainly for the first quarters, we found that those were really quite useful. So the workshops, we found much more efficient than the open practices. What we could do is we could actually target a few students and get the relevant helpers in there. So that way they could have a whole evening with their thing being run. Generally it would be students doing the same thing. So a bit like running a course, if they weren't actually ringing, they could be standing behind somebody who was ringing the same thing that they were learning. And it also made sure there was enough people to provide a good framework around them. Now, since then, we've got Ringing Room and we've got Weekly, and for those for whom it works, I found that a fantastic tool to do one-to-one teaching to teach a particular method. But the workshops have been good, and again, we try and have teachers and helpers. I warned somebody the clocks will go off. Teachers and helpers from the different towers in the hub, so again that people could see that they were all together. So it might be a specific skill for learning the ropes, so it might be somebody who's learning to cover, or particularly working on some of the kaleidoscope activities, placemaking, dodging, whatever. So that's the sort of thing we did. What we found is people are getting on to sort of, certainly up to level 4 and level 5, their needs were better addressed by the quarter peal attempts, and I'll say a little bit more about the quarter peals later on. We even took one of our workshops to Belgium. There happened to be 4 of us over there, and it shows the advantage. When we started off, Martin had only started to learn in March. Liz was a ringer in the UK before she went over to Belgium. To start with, we couldn't even ring plain hunt, but at the time we'd finished the workshop, as you can see, they could ring the treble and tenor to doubles. So that was really nice to do that. So the quarter peals, these have been a great success. They've helped the teachers and they've helped the learners, and they've helped draw all sorts of people from the hub together, because we mainly use ringers from the hub, but it's not exclusive by any means. We don't want to be separate from our branch. We don't want to be separate from the guild. We want to work within that. And in fact, one of the good things that we did is we rang a quarter of Grand Cicadas, because 4 of the hub's members had actually been on a course that was organised by the guild, had a day ringing Grand Cicadas, and then we managed to arrange a quarter for them to really consolidate it. So that was a nice one. So far, since we started, we've rung 132. I don't know how many we've lost. We will have lost a lot, because we do an awful lot of firsts. So there will be an awful lot of quarters that don't come round. So we kind of think of them as quarters come workshops. So if somebody, say, is learning Kent, okay, let's try a quarter of Kent. You're going to get 40 minutes of ringing your method. So that's really been quite helpful. We've had 6 first quarters. We had more people ringing first quarters, but not necessarily a hub organised quarter. It might have been organised by the tower. 112 first of something. So it could be first in the method, first covering, first on 8, first on 10 even. And some of those firsts are not necessarily for the inexperienced ringers, the people moving up through the levels. Some of those have been for the teachers. So every so often the teachers get something for them, which is very motivating, because otherwise you can feel quite isolated if it's just you in your tower ringing things for your learners, which you're quite happy to do, but that can get, you just never seem to get anything for yourself. This way, the teachers are getting things as well, which is quite nice. So we have included ringers that could be somebody for the workshops, for a quarter is for. It could be the helpers. We try and draw in people from other towers as well. And as I said, it's something for the teachers and helpers as well. It's helped us raise funds. I asked for the adults for a donation. It is just a donation. They can give me as much as little as they like. And from that, we make a donation to the Ringing World. We make a donation to the tower in which we're ringing the quarter. So that tends to be regularly. 3 of the 4 quarters in a month will be at one of the towers of the hub, and then the 4th one we move around. So we'll give a donation for that, and then we give a donation to art every year, so that helps to contribute to that donation as well. And in the holidays, we focus particularly on the young ringers. That's something I feel quite passionate about. As a young ringer myself, who was in a very isolated tower, I think it's actually important to help get the young ringers together and help them to make progress. So where are we going from there? What are we going to do? And what further things have happened? Actually, it's not what we're going to do, it's what has happened recently. So the new band at Hurst, they've gone from strength to strength. They were having weekly practices, and Sunday service ringing had resumed at Hurst, and they're ringing for their own weddings, sometimes with a bit of help. Obviously, that hasn't happened since lockdown. They've gone the handbell route. So a couple of the ringing remembers recruits have got a set of handbells, and as much as possible, they've been improving their handbell ringing. For the first time in years and years and years, certainly for some of the towers, we entered the branch 6-bell competition. And again, that's working with the branch so that we're part of it, although we're helping each other within it. So 3 of the towers, that was Wargrave, Sonning and Twyford, and our young ringers, they named themselves, entered that 6-bell competition and actually did quite well. I think 7 bands entered, and the Loddon Hub towers were 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th, which shows the advantage of the cluster, because before we'd done that, that wouldn't have happened. It's because we've been able to help each other, move each other forward, that we've raised the standard within all the towers to enable us to do that. We had a Christmas curry and a Christmas young ringers practice, which seemed to involve an awful lot of chocolate, but that seems to work all right for them. We've welcomed a new tower to the hub, as you saw, and as I say, it's that sort of flexibility I think is quite important. You've got to do what is working at that particular moment. So if workshops are needed at this time, that's what you do. If you need something else, that's what you do. If a new tower wants to come in, that's fine. If one of the towers wanted to leave, that would probably be fine too. We sent 2 of our young ringers on a Module 1 course, and they have both started to teach. Much to our frustration, one of them had just got his learner to put both strokes together all on his own, and then we had lockdown. So that was where we got to for that. So we also, because it was the way it was working, and as I say, the flexibility it is quite important. We were planning on, and that was planning because it never actually quite happened, to start an advanced practice, because some of the people who, when we started off, were sort of ringing the treble to Bob Double's stage, we're now at the stage of ringing double Norwich and surprise major. So we wanted something for them, and so we were going to start an advanced practice or workshop again, really, where you could target and ask specific people, so you knew who was going to be there and you knew that you'd got sufficient good ringers to make it work. So say that hasn't happened because it all went a bit AWOL at that point. So if we want a successful cluster, I mean, any group of towers can get together, I'd like you to think about and give me some feedback as to what you think is going to help contribute to having a successful cluster. So that, David, it's time for the next poll, please.
We've just gone past the 50% mark. Oh, now 60, now 70. Oh,
they go mad.
going mad. We're nearly up to 80%. Slowing down a bit now. Last few votes coming in. We have nearly 90% voted. We'll give it another 5 seconds and I'll close the poll. No more coming in now. 3, 2, 1. I'll close and share the results.
Yeah, and I would very much agree with some of those. So very few people saw that being in the same branch district association as important. It's not irrelevant because you tend to know the other ringers to a certain extent within the branch or the district. But I think what's more important, as you obviously do too, is that the towers are relatively close. Now, the close is perhaps not quite the right terminology. I think they need to be within easy access of each other. So my closest tower is not very far away, but it takes an awful long time to get there because I've got to drive miles down the road to find a bridge to go across and then miles back again. If the ferry was still there, it would be fine, but the ferry is not. So that's a problem. So it might be a group of towers down a nice fast main road. So it's dead easy to move from one to the other. But if you've got a group of towers across the borders of an association that are close together, I see no reason why those shouldn't be a successful cluster. I do think that you need a common vision. If you're not all thinking and wanting to achieve the same things, then I don't think it's going to work. So having the arts teaching hub, and we have a charter that we've signed up for, that we all see these things as important, we all want to move in the same sort of direction, then I think that is going to be important. Because if you're not thinking along the same lines, if you're not going to get on together, if the people doing the teaching aren't going to work to the same sort of standards or the same ideas, I think that would be very, very difficult. Glad you feel like I do about the meetings. We've had very few meetings, but we do talk to each other. So we actually were getting to the stage we were needing to have another meeting, but I think that's something that will have to wait, but might be a good way to get us started again when we do eventually come out of lockdown. So what else have we got? About the same standard. I agree. I don't think that's hugely important. It might not work if you've got one tower in a little group that's at one end of the spectrum and the other 4 towers, say, at the other end of the spectrum. But I don't think that that's the most important thing. It's about sharing ideas, it's about working together and things like that. Flexibility is important. It's no use saying we're going to do it this way, because the circumstances change. And I think it's quite important, if you're going to be successful, if you're going to develop, you've got to adjust to whatever you've got at that time. And so things will change, and you may be doing one thing, then you might go back. So I'm going to go back to my certificates because they were really useful. I'd just forgotten about them. So I don't think there is one magic formula to having a successful cluster. I think the most important thing is thinking about it, and is it going to work for us? So where are we going to from there? Would we as the Rod Ringing Hub recommend others to form hubs or clusters? And the answer to that is yes, if it works for you. If it's no use saying that every little group of towers is going to be able to form a successful cluster. It might not. But where you have got a little group of towers, then there are huge advantages, absolutely huge advantages to working together and helping each other. And as I say, we found that it's helped the teachers as well as the learners. Both have benefited. Would we do it again? Yes, of course we would. Would we do it the same? Don't know. If things were different, then perhaps we'd do it differently, but that's where we are with that. So there's just some ideas for you as to what we've done that you can perhaps take some of those and think about forming a cluster for yourselves. I certainly feel that it's quite likely that we will have lost a bit of momentum when we get back to it. And it could be that forming a cluster might be the best way for some towers that have perhaps lost some ringers, certainly lost some confidence, to get going again after the lockdown. So that's it for me. I think I've talked far too much. So if anybody's got any questions, I will give my best to give some answers.
Thank you very, very much, Vinni. And you fulfilled the brief perfectly. You spoke for 45 minutes, which is just what we asked for.
That was luck.
Thank you. So if anyone's got any questions, can they either raise their hand, and I'll also be looking through the chat. But we have one there, David, for Julia Cater.
Yeah, hi, and thanks so much for that. That was a very understated but very informative presentation. Thank you. So you finished up there about sort of what makes an ideal cluster, and I just want to continue with that a little bit with some questions and maybe a bit of a discussion. I'm thinking about the number in a cluster and whether anybody's got any experience of whether a larger number like 6 or 8 or a smaller number like 3 or 4, you know, what the pros and cons of that. And I understand there's a sort of, you know, you have to play around with the history and the personalities and the leaders and the teachers and the geography and but is there any sort of words of wisdom that anyone's got about what makes a good number or the pros and cons about larger or smaller clusters, please?
Well, one thing I would say, if you start getting more towers than say 5, you're going to run out of practice nights. So if we're going to support each other's practices and 3 of you have got a practice night on the same night, that can be quite a challenge. Possibly don't need to get too big, because that might well be something that's fulfilled by the branch or district that you're in. I wouldn't say there is one ideal size. I would have thought even 2 working together would help. So anything that you can do to help. But I think much more than 6, it's going to be harder for it to work. But that's my personal feeling.
Okay. Simon Ridley, you had your hand up, and I see you posted in the chat as well.
I did. I finally found the hand button. Yeah, I had one question. We were considering setting something up in the Cheltenham district around clusters, and one of the big issues that faces us is actually advertising and attracting beginners. Have you found that the cluster has helped in terms of advertisement and attracting and recruitment? And if it has, what did you do?
We haven't done as much as we could have done on that. We have run a couple of taster sessions, and we did a thing where I think that was contact through art, saying that somebody wanted a bell ringing experience. So we did that. Mm-hmm. After our formal meeting, we were going to contact the local schools to see if anybody wanted to do it for D of E. But that's something we haven't worked hugely on. That each tower seems to source their own learners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions for Vinny or points they'd like to make about making ringing clusters? And just there seem to be lots of support for cakes, chocolate, and
The chocolate, definitely,
and jelly
chocolate.
babies as well. That was a new one on this particular one, but so someone said, is it more about number of ringers? This is from Catherine Staunders, rather than number of towers.
Probably if you've got more ringers, you need fewer towers. It's helping where each tower was struggling a bit for numbers. And it's certainly still the case that some of the towers are still struggling on a Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
The practice nights tend to be fine because we're all out there helping each other. But obviously on a Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
We're all ringing to our own towers. But that said, I think the Sunday service ringing at most of the towers has improved.
Good. And there's a question here. I'll just start with this from Kevin Carter, who said, did safeguarding present any problems with the young ringers coming from different churches?
As art members, of course, we've all got DBS anyway. And I just can't try to think where we are on that one. I don't. Could I ask Simon Farrer to come in? And Simon, did we get double checked within the churches?
So what we do at Twyford is that as leader, I'm asked to do levels 0, 1, 2 and 3 of the safeguarding, and to get other members of the band to do level 0 on their own, which everyone's been fairly happy to do. Is that what you meant, Vinny?
It was. I think the question is there an issue of me teaching your young ringers? But I don't think there is, because we're all art checked.
So yes, what we've done, certainly with our church and with all the churches in the area, they want to see DBS certificates for anybody working with young people. And what we've done is I've had any of our sort of teaching people from other towers just come along, meet the church safeguarding officer and show them the certificate, and they make a note of that.
Yeah, so did I just show mine to Debs?
It wasn't Debs, it was Chris who was doing it. We've now got someone else coming into it, and I'll introduce you to her in due course.
Yeah. So generally, no, it hasn't been a problem, because we, being art members, I think is the answer to that one.
Okay, so Richard Heath, you've got your hand raised for a question.
Unmute yourself, Richard.
Yes, unmute yourself.
Yeah, good thinking. It's to do really with the management of the whole situation. Is that a toil, or is it shared, or how do you go on?
It's kind of shared. Different people will organise different things. So we had one person organise the Module 1 course, one person's organised the social activities, I've organised the quarters, and different people have organised the advanced practices and the workshops. So it kind of, because we're a small group, I think we share that work around each other reasonably well. I certainly don't find it. I've done the quarters, and I don't find it that onerous.
No, I would go further and say we operate like quite an effective anarchist collective.
Yes, I could agree with that.
Yeah, so that was the other thing, you know, is the disputes might be that quarter isn't relevant for what I've been trying to do with my sector.
No, it's more, I will say, have you got anybody who would benefit from a quarter? Or they will come to me and say, so-and-so is ready to ring that, can you organise something for them? But generally, because personally it means a lot to me, because I was so isolated in the tower that I learned, I do tend to look out for other people.
Right, thank you for your comments. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Roger. You've got, yeah.
No, just to follow up on 2 points. The first from Vinny about the size of a cluster. I was involved in a cluster a few years ago where we had about 6 towers. Several of the towers shared a band, so you'd like ring at 9:30 service at one tower and the 10:30 service at another. So it wasn't 6 different bands and such. But after a few years, we had another couple of towers or bands join in, and it wasn't so much a problem over clash of practice nights. It was actually things like quarter peals that one band had a regular Sunday evening quarter peel slot, and then there was competition, shall we say, for quarter peals, and it became a little bit stressed. So I think certainly the smaller group and having like-minded towers is important. Just to follow up on Simon's point about recruitment, we did recruit across the hub, or whatever you'd like to call it, or ringing centre, and we used things like the Charmer Ring to go out to community events. And what we found was that there was obviously a lot of interest, but the traditional model of people coming from a parish was lost. I mean, people could live everywhere. I mean, we tried 1 or 2 social media and networking sites as well. So people came from quite a wide area. And again, that presented problems. Which band did they go and join? And there was obviously a bit of competition for the more able recruits, shall we say. So certainly group recruitment can work because you can pool resources and share money and get things like posters and roller banners and things, but it needs to be planned and thought through. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'd like to...
Ian's got his hand up. It's a real hand, not a virtual hand.
Ah, right, okay, sorry. Who is it?
It's Ian.
Right, well done.
Does anybody have any experience or information on how the development of clusters has influenced or affected how the local branch has progressed, and what the interrelationship is between what the branch provides and what emerging clusters provide? We certainly have an informal cluster where I ring of 3 towers, which are physically very close together, but all 3 village parishes. They set off from quite different backgrounds, and have probably different needs. But we do have a lot of movement across the towers and mutual support. But it's whether the existence of clusters how is it impacting on what the branch provides? How is the branch operation influencing the clusters? The interaction between the 2.
We don't want to be separate from the branch, okay? And certainly from a personal point of view, and I think from the point of view of the members of the towers involved in the cluster, their interaction with the branch has been the same as it always has been. So quite a few of the branch officers are members of the cluster. We do involve other branch members from other towers in the branch in the quarters, so that hopefully we're not being seen as exclusive. It would need somebody from outside the cluster in the branch, I think, to say how it felt from their point of view. It's improved the level of the young ringers in the branch, and I think most of our young ringers do go to the young ringers branch practices.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else waving hands? For either physically or... I'll just flick through. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you very much to Vinny for a very interesting presentation today. I hope it sparks some ideas in your own minds about what makes a successful cluster. And I just want one or two little announcements. We have one more presentation in this week-long series, which is on Sunday. It was a presentation that was added on, and it is about ringing schools. And it's obviously a subject that's quite related to this one. So if anyone hasn't signed up for Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, then there's still plenty of time to register on that. Aside from that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and we'll say thank you to Vinni in the traditional manner. Thank you, Vinni.